Alright, so this video is going to look at accounting. We will start with a quick overview of how the two systems plug together, being Buildxact and your accounting. We'll have a look step by step at getting the connection started. We will talk about any extra security that you may need to add depending on your accounting system. We'll look at when is an item ready to sync into your accounting and how do you process that. And lastly, we'll look at the sync log, which is basically our list of everything we've synced into your accounting system. So to start with, I'm going to bring up this bit of a summary of our process. I find this is the easiest place to start, hence starting with this and leading here. In summary, basically what we've got here is the Buildxact side of the world and the accounting side of the world and how they integrate and interact together. So the easiest way to explain all of this is to say that the problem we're trying to solve with the accounting sync is that we, as Buildxact, need a lot of financial data to do what we do. We need to know when you buy things, we need to know when you invoice customers, but on the other hand, so does your accounting. So the problem is that prior to this sync existing, people would have to put information into Buildxact and into their accounting, which is a pain. The sync ultimately is just meaning that when you put information into Buildxact, we sync it or we duplicate it, we copy it into your accounting, and that means that you don't have to do it. So the biggest benefit is really just legwork. We're saving you doing the extra work. With the purchases side of Buildxact, if you tell us, hey Buildxact, I've purchased this, or I've got an invoice for this item, that will sync in as a bill to your accounting. And some different accounting systems will have slightly varied names for this, but bill is the most common one. A customer invoice will sync in as a sale. Again, names may vary, but sale is the most common. And once it's in your accounting, we've included the bank in here to show that once it's in your accounting, it will work exactly the same as how you would have dealt with it previously to connecting with Buildxact, i.e. bills can be paid, they can be reconciled with your bank, sales can be reconciled with your bank, but typically speaking, people will have used an accounting system prior to Buildxact, not always, but often, and that means that this accounting side of it is actually more familiar than the Buildxact integration or how it works together. So once it gets into accounting, just know that your accounting system essentially takes over from there. Lucky last thing to cover here is there is a sync button, which basically means that we hold all items from going into your accounting until you hit the sync button in your accounting and in Buildxact rather, and we'll show you where that is. The whole idea here is to say that if you put a purchase through, for example, and you mess it up, we don't want that mistake going directly into your accounting. We want to allow you the time to fix it before it gets pushed across. And typically speaking, we see people enter a bill, and if they have made a mistake, their behavior will be such that they come back pretty quick because they might save it with a few too many zeros and go, oh, well, that's 17,000, should be 1,700. And they'll fix it very quickly. So most cases, this sync button catches mistakes before they go into accounting. Awesome. Let's go into my Buildxact, which is this one, and we will go through the connection steps. So I'm going to connect with Xero. I'm in my integrations screen. Connect. It will take me directly to Xero. Now I've already logged into Xero, so I've put in my two-factor code, etc. Hence it takes me straight to this step, but you may have to log in to your Xero account. It'll be the same for the other two, for MYOB, AccountWrite, and for Quickbooks. We'll go allow access. And this is basically just the tick. This is the only thing you do in your accounting before coming back. It'll have a quick think about it. And it will say, There we go. Xero connection established. All other users in Buildxact will be prompted to set up two-step verification. So this is a point I want to make about extra security. If you are a Xero user, you may be required, before you can even connect to Buildxact, to turn on two-step verification, which is basically the login where you have to provide a phone code. It's actually the same style of login Xero uses itself. The other thing to know is once you connect to Xero, everybody on your account has to do the same thing. So just a quick segue, and I'll close out of the settings. I'll come back to them. Just a quick segue to say, if you're struggling with the login process, the multi-factor, we have a really good help article under the FAQs, which is our Buildxact Help Center. And I'm just going to search for this. Note that when you log in, you may have actually seen it pop up and recommend these articles. But if you're not sure how this is going to work, you may want to make yourself a bit more comfortable by just checking it out first up. And it'll go through how you log in, how the two-step authentication works. As mentioned, it's the same one Xero uses. So if you've logged into Xero before, this should actually not be too foreign at all. Awesome. So it's connected. I need to go into the settings, and you noticed probably before that it popped them open for me, but I can use the cog to get into this. I need to go through and make sure that my settings are correct so that I don't get any sync issues. So we'll talk through it. Make this a bit bigger. There we go. We've basically got choose what gets synced to Xero. So that means, hey, you can send both purchases across, or you can send invoices across, or one or the other, or both. And up to you whether you do both, which is generally what most people do. When do you want to sync from? So I've connected this account before, hence the sync date is 1st of Jan 2020. But if it's your first time, it'll show today's date. And all this is saying is how far back should Buildxact look for stuff to sync into Xero. It's a great filter if you are transitioning between systems, because you can say, hey, maybe 1st of July, that's my cutover date. And up until that point, I'll continue to throw stuff into Xero manually. But after that, I'm going to use the Buildxact method. And this will prevent old rubbish going into your accounting. This section, this is to do with where do we put information in Xero when it's related to purchases. And there's two types of purchases. First of all, we have expenses or purchases related to suppliers, and we have another one related to contractors. This trips up people a bit, but all it really means is if I do a purchase order and put an expense through Buildxact where that order is for a contact who we find in the suppliers bit or suppliers section of our address book, then this is the default for it to go to in Xero. And this list will be your chart of accounts, meaning you can go to Xero and actually add more, which I did. I added contractor and materials as extra ones. Expense account, if it's a purchase order where we find the assigned person in contacts under contractors, send it to here. You don't have to split them like this. I did because I prefer that. But if not, they can actually just be the same. Now, tax settings. This is probably the part that confuses people the most. So from here to here is all tax settings for purchases. Main question we get here is, why does this and this look exactly the same? And the answer is, it does in my case because I'm an Australian user, but it won't in all cases. So I'll explain the detail here. The first two are for tax settings on older jobs. So jobs or estimates started pre-November 2020. And this is a simpler tax setup before we made some of our changes. And what it's saying here is, hey, Xero, when I, Buildxact, have an expense that has tax, you call that GST on expenses. So this is just us telling Xero what tax code to use. and you can select them as you can see. Hey Xero, when we have an expense that's got no tax, you call that GST free expenses. So it's just translating into Xero's language. These two are for new jobs where the estimate or job was created, depending on which one came first, after November 2020. And I'm an Australian user, as mentioned, so my tax here is quite simple. I've got GST and I've got GST free. If you're a North American user, you will find that you may have several more boxes here relating to different state, federal, county taxes. But you, when you see this, you will hopefully realize that each of these relates to a tax rate that you have set up if you're a North American user. For Australian and New Zealand users, a lot simpler. These two boxes basically just have to be the same as these two. So we have to say, or we're saying here, hey Xero, when we have GST on expenses, you call that GST on expenses. When we have exempt expenses, you call that GST free. And we're just, again, translating for Xero. Going on down, we have another option for income. And this is to say, when I put income through or when I put a sales invoice through for a customer, I want this to go into Xero in the sales account. And again, you can change it. Xero specific option, you have the option for it to go in pre-approved or authorized or submitted, meaning you don't have to approve it when it lands in Xero, where by default they all land in as a draft and need approving. Personally, I suggest leave this as draft until you're comfortable. Then moving on down some more, tax settings, but for income this time. Hey Xero, when we have income tax, you call that GST on income. When there is income without tax, you call that GST free income. And the same rules apply for this section as we had for expenses, in that Australia and New Zealand users, this will match this. But for North American users, you will have potentially quite a few options here relating to income tax for a state, federal, county, and exemptions for those. And all you're doing, regardless of who you are, is matching these to the right tax code in your accounting system. Awesome. A Xero specific option, we can integrate with tracking categories. Not something we're going to go through right now, but I highly recommend it. It allows for better reporting in Xero. For things like MYOB and Quickbooks, it's actually something that's already there. We don't need the extra feature to do this, to bring in the job numbers to those systems. So Xero needed this feature to work, to be able to report in that way. Highly, highly recommend. And there's information in the Xero manual, which you can find in our help section on how to set this up. Beautiful, so that is the default settings. If you ever need to go and get a bit more fancy with that, specifically around purchase categories, where, hey, looking at these ones, for me, this is ample. I'm happy to split it into two different groups. But if you want to get a bit more fancy with this, know that you can go into your contacts, and there will be a default account here per contact. So if you ever need to, you can go through and set your contacts up with a default account. If you are the type of person who has a system whereby, hey, look, all plumbers go into the Xero plumbing account and all electricians go into the Xero electrical account. So know that this is definitely an option. Beautiful. Let's have a look at when items are ready to sync. So I'm going to use an existing job here. And if you haven't seen other videos about syncing or about the job section, quick intro. When we're talking syncing, we're talking only purchase orders and only outgoing invoices. And you'll see this little icon I've got, which indicates that this item has synced already. And it was ready to sync well, there's two ways of knowing this. If I go into it, it was basically ready to sync because I went through, said it was received, and added a receipt or an invoice to it, which also itself is synced. This little bit here, if I go into it, you'll recognize the screen hopefully. This little bit here is actually the part Xero cares about and the information Xero will get. So Xero wants to know reference numbers, invoice dates to help it figure out the payment, like when the payment is due. And as long as one of these is here, there is something to sync if it hasn't gone already. Another way of saying the same thing is the status of received or part received will indicate that there is one of these or more of these sitting in your purchase order. So hence you can look at it at two angles. Personally, I filter a lot by received and part received. If I'm looking for all purchases that have either synced or are ready to sync. But that's how you know that something is ready to sync, or that's another way to say it is that's when something will sync, is you've put the receipt in, you've marked it as received or part received, and over it goes to Xero for your accounting. On the other side of the world, we have the customer invoices, and I've got two here that are already synced. This is a little bit simpler because a status of invoiced or received means that that is eligible to sync, and the logic here is really quite straightforward. Pending invoices are in the future. Xero does not care about them at all in the slightest. Versus as soon as it's invoiced, it needs to be in your accounting to be reconciled. So that's where we will go. An invoiced invoice is ready to sync. The only exception here is if you go pending directly to received, it hasn't synced before and we check whether it's gone, and if you go pending straight to received, we will sync in that case too. Note there is rules in place to stop things syncing more than once, which obviously is really important. To process the sync, you will go and you'll actually know it's ready to sync because you've got little numbers here next to integrations. You will go in, you'll go Xero, either sync or sync, and it'll say, hey, it takes up to 5 minutes. That's in the case of bigger syncs. It's usually quicker than that, but it'll basically crunch away and off it goes. Now, while it's doing that, two questions we get a lot, just to cover these quickly. One question is, great, I understand the syncing principle, but what happens if I do sync a mistake into my accounting? And the answer here is, if you sync something into your accounting and it's a mistake, you need to fix it in your accounting system and in Buildxact. Another way to explain this is to say that if you just fix it in Buildxact, because we only ever sync things one time, and there's rules to make sure it never multi-syncs, if you just fix it in Buildxact, the accounting system would still be wrong. So hence the sync button, we try and avoid this situation because it's a pain. But if it syncs across as wrong, you have to fix in accounting and in Buildxact. The other question we get quite a lot of is overheads, general business overheads. What should I do with them? And the answer is, there's really two options, and it's personal preference. Neither is better than the other. Option A is you can put it directly into bills in accounting, which is probably more common. And option B is you can put overheads into Buildxact as a separate job. This second method will sync in to Xero, so it'll still all end up in the same place. The only main difference is that you will have a job number, which is like an overhead job tied to all of those costs in Xero. So much of a muchness, personal preference. I like the idea of putting it directly into Xero, but it's very much, 6 and half a dozen. It's up to you which way you go. Awesome. So that sync I just pushed across was successful. Let's have a quick look at the log, and then that will be it. So my log here, or the view log button generally, will show anything it's pushed across. I can go and print the history of all my sync items, and this is useful for mainly two things. One is just checking what values and what items have synced. So mainly this will come up when people go, gee, I can't find that invoice that went across. I don't know what's happened. And in that case, ironically, usually it's that the invoice was invoiced much earlier than they thought, and it went to Xero weeks ago. That's why they can't find it. But you'll be able to track this and see what's synced when. If you ever get an exclamation mark instead of a number next to integrations, you will come into the log also, and it'll say an error occurred, the sync failed because. And if that ever happens to you, you've really got two options. One is go into the FAQs, and for whatever accounting system you use, search for Xero issue or MYOB issue or QuickBooks issue, and there is a list of the most common ones. And when I say most common, this is out of the 1% of issues that we get. So there'll be a guide on what the issue means. For Xero, it's most commonly that people have deleted the contact. For accounting generally, we get this one across most systems where people have locked a period down, so end of financial year, and then that accounting system rejects things that we try and sync into last year's period. But yeah, different systems have different nuances, so worth checking out if you ever checking out these articles if you ever get this issue. Option B here is you can absolutely reach out to us, and we can help you here. Brilliant. The final point is, if you are just starting with this, don't be afraid to send a couple of test sync items into your accounting, knowing that you can delete them on the other end. That will give you a great idea of what it looks like when it goes across, and also a fair bit of confidence of how the process works. But if you have any further questions, do reach out and let us know. Thanks so much.